Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Oscar Keys, the Multimedia Teaching and Learning Librarian here at VCU Libraries, which is a fancy way of saying that I help students and faculty looking to use creative technologies in their studies, teaching, and research through our resources here at the workshop. And I want to thank all of you so much for joining us today for the second installment of our Creative Inquiry series, featuring Bridget Todd from the award-winning podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet. This series aims to add a little friction to these sleek ideas about innovative technologies by providing a platform to discuss the complexities of living in an increasingly technological world, featuring the expertise of researchers who make and makers who research. These speakers do not approach technology as an answer, but rather as a question. How does technology reflect the issues, inequities, and injustices in our society, and what is there to be done about it? Before we dive into the main event, I do want to take a moment and thank everyone who made today's event possible. I owe the biggest thanks to our PR and communications teams, Sue Robinson, Caslin Applewhite, and Ryan Pander, who have supported this project from the beginning and developed the promotional materials and handled the virtual venue planning. I also want to thank my team over at the workshop for the encouragement, especially my boss, Eric Johnson, who's here, who has been nothing but supportive of this series and all of its early pipe dream iterations. I also want to thank my boss's boss, Jimmy Gaffery, who gave us the big thumbs up and helped us find funding from the library admin side of things to make this event happen. And of course, many thanks to our public affairs research librarian, Nia Rogers, who is the co-host of our own in-house award-winning podcast, Civil Discourse, and will be the co-facilitator for the Q&A portion of today's session. And last but certainly not least, I do want to give a big thanks and a very warm welcome to our speaker, Bridget Todd, the creator of the acclaimed and aforementioned podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, which explores how marginalized people show up online in response to the lack of inclusion in conversations around the internet. There Are No Girls on the Internet, also known as Tangati, earned the Best Technology Podcast at the iHeartRadio Podcast Awards and a Shorty Award for the Best Podcast miniseries for Disinformed, a miniseries which explored how the misinformation and conspiracy theories around COVID, gender, and race hurt marginalized communities. Also, it is one of my favorite podcasts to recommend to faculty looking to incorporate podcasts into their curriculum, as it balances rigorous investigative journalism, compassionate interviewing techniques, pragmatic explanations of complex systems, and personal narratives with the technologies that affect our everyday lives, all while having a great overall vibe. Her podcast isn't just approachable, it's inviting, which for a podcast is like no small feat. Todd is also the director of communication for the National Gender Justice Advocacy organization Ultraviolet, where she regularly meets with leadership from platforms like Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok to advocate for and develop policy recommendations to make digital experiences safer and more inclusive. Todd's writing and work on technology, race, gender, and culture has been featured in The Atlantic, Newsweek, The Nation, The Daily Show, and several other outlets. She is a frequently cited expert, trainer, and speaker on combating disinformation and extremism online, advocating for social media platform accountability, creating safer digital experiences for women and other marginalized folks, and celebrating and amplifying marginalized people's contributions to the tech and the internet, of which I hope she now includes herself as a part of this history. And now I will stop my rambling and gushing and pass things over to Bridget, who I know all of us are excited to learn from today. And as a reminder, if you have questions, you'll have a chance to send them through the Q&A feature rather than just the chat function at the end. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Before I get started, I just have to echo the major thanks for letting me be here. Thank you so much to the VCU community, Oscar, everybody who made this possible. I'm thrilled to be here. VCU has always had like a special place in my heart. My parents met on campus there. I live in Richmond. I'm in Richmond all the time. I'm from Richmond. I went to St. Gertrude's High School, so I cannot be prouder to be here. I'm gonna share my slides. It's gonna totally work perfectly. This is my fear of this not working when I need it to. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right, slideshow, make bigger. Oh, darn it. Slideshow. There we go. Can everyone see this? Looks good?
Not quite yet.
Oh, no. What have I done wrong here? Wait, I didn't share my screen. Yes.
Good
cool,
to go.
Perfect. Phew. So as I said, thanks to everyone for letting me be here. I am so excited. I am Bridget Todd, and I make content about the internet. The internet is something that is really important to me. I'll explain a little bit more about why that is in just a moment. But this is an image of me that I wanted to start with. I am wearing my favorite article of clothing, which is my World Wide Web jumpsuit. It is a pants jacket combination that just says World Wide Web over it. And I feel like that really grounds this conversation in sort of who I am, how I show up in the world, and how important the internet is for me. I've worked across a couple of podcasts. My flagship podcast, as Oscar said, is There Are No Girls on the Internet. I also am the host of Mozilla's podcast IRL, which explores the ethics around AI, and iHeartRadio's Internet Hate Machine, which explores how online harassment and the harassment of women of color in politics is impacting all of our democracies. I also work in tech platform accountability. That is a really fancy word for the idea that I meet with leadership at platforms like Facebook and TikTok to sort of push them gently into advocating for policies that I hope are less hostile toward marginalized folks. I do this work because I really deeply believe in the power of the internet. I've seen the impact this had on my own life, and I believe that a healthier internet, one where everyone can be meaningfully represented and safely show up and participate, will give us a healthier world. So a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First, I'll talk about sort of where we are with the internet ecosystem that we have today in April of 2023, a little bit of conversation around the erasure of marginalized identities online. We'll hear audio from 5 voices that I think are making a big difference, and then talk about podcasting, why podcasting is a medium that I like to use. First, I want to start with a question. Even though I am a podcaster, I kind of hate listening to myself talk. So I want to start by asking you all the question. When you think of our current digital landscape, what comes to mind? How does it feel for you? Like, what words would you use to describe it? There are no wrong answers here. I'm going to take a look at the chat and give this some thought and then put your answer in the chat. Again, no wrong answers. When you think of the internet landscape, what comes up for you? Ooh, scammy and hostile and angry. I hear that. Constantly changing, oversaturation. Mean-spirited often. Ugh, Robin, I wish that I did not agree with you. Unevenly distributed. Mine's made up in advance. Ooh, that's a good one. Too much mainstream pushed out to the little guy. Very rich. Too much good stuff to listen to. Siloed. All of these are very siloed. Yeah, all of these are ways that I also feel. So when I think about the way that the internet is going right now, I think of this clip from Dorinda Medley, if you watch Real Housewives, where she says, not well. If you were to ask me, how is the internet doing in 2023? Not well. Let's get into it. So I don't think I need to tell you that Twitter is a garbage fire right now. I actually had to sort of add this slide in last night because under Elon Musk's leadership, the tomfoolery at Twitter continues, and I wanted to make sure that today's session was really grounded in this sort of new shifting digital reality. According to the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, anti-Semitic hate speech has more than doubled after Musk's acquisition of Twitter. And this is a trend that is held in the months after Musk took over. Twitter quietly recently rolled back policies involving transphobic language, which was a huge bummer just because of the state of the world, but also because that was a policy that I personally worked on. That was work that I personally, my team at Ultraviolet personally helped to get that passed, just gone. Dis and misinformation on the platform is on the rise, both among domestic and foreign actors. And I mean, y'all probably saw this, but blowing up verification has made it even more difficult to know which accounts to trust and has just overall been like a confusing and embarrassing mess. Now, I definitely watched this unfold and found it funny, like watching Stephen King and LeBron James go at it with Elon Musk on Twitter. Of course, that's hilarious. I loved that. But it's important to know that, like, as funny as it is to watch this kind of thing unfold, it has very real consequences, right? If there was a public emergency, people wouldn't really know whether an account on Twitter claiming to be, say, from their local government was actually who they said they are. And, you know, as this is coming up, you know, an election year in 2024, if all of this is sort of not sorted out, I think it could be really concerning. Let's move on to Facebook. I would say that Facebook is basically, at this point, kind of your weird old cousin that you kind of don't really want to talk to at the family reunion. How many of you, I'm curious, like, how many of you would say that you feel that Facebook and Instagram is sort of relevant to your overall media diet today in 2023? You can let me know in the chat. I'm just curious. Okay, so Oscar left and I left Facebook in 2018. Okay, I was gonna say 2028. Oscar is living in the future. Oh, so this is a good point about groups and businesses. I would say I also only use Facebook for niche groups, especially podcast groups. My favorite podcast is called Who Weekly, and they have this vast network of closed Facebook groups for everything under the sun. And that's like the main reason that I am staying on the platform. And so definitely feel you on that. You know, if you are a creative type or have a business or something, that might be a platform that you're showing up on more. But in terms of the way that Facebook sort of used to be this big part of our internet diet, it's really sort of changed. Like, I feel like people show up there because they have to. They have some reason that's keeping them there, not because they want to, not because when they open the platform, it feels good, it sparks something good for them, right? And so, you know, I know that last summer, Adam Mosseri, who was the head of Instagram, announced that Instagram was going to start transitioning more to prioritize Reels. And everybody was like, no, terrible idea. The Kardashians said, please don't do this, terrible idea. And then he said, like, oh, well, we know that our user base really likes photos, but short form video is what we need to stay relevant. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to say because, you know, obviously as a business, Facebook wants Instagram to be relevant and to be able to compete with platforms like TikTok. But what about what the users want, right? Like, the users were saying, I don't want to open Instagram and, you know, see reels that I saw 2 weeks ago on TikTok. And so it was really interesting to me how he was saying, like, well, it doesn't really matter what the user experience is and what the user actually wants. What really matters is that we are able to compete as a corporation. And then a couple of weeks later, he came back and said, okay, just kidding. We are not going to prioritize reels so much. And so to me, that really illustrated that maybe we're in this era where Facebook and Instagram maybe don't really know what they're meant to be and what niche they're meant to serve and what role they want to have in our sort of online diets anymore. Let's move on to talking a bit about TikTok. TikTok is the fastest growing social media platform right now. And obviously the big conversation is about whether or not it's a national security risk. This has sparked the Restrict Act, bipartisan legislation, which was introduced by Virginia's Mark Warner. And so some folks probably saw that hearing with the head of TikTok a couple of weeks ago. There is a lot to be said about, you know, whether or not TikTok is truly a national security threat or any of that. But I think what's important to note about this legislation is that it would really have a big, wide-reaching impact on the internet and the way that we think about the internet and social media platforms showing up in our media diet now. And so, you know, people call it sort of the TikTok ban app, but it's really so much more than that. This legislation could completely change the entire landscape of our social media ecosystem. And this actually would not be the first time that something like that has happened. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here, what happened to the internet, and, you know, how it got to this place where folks say that it feels polarized, like a slog, you know, like a hateful, chaotic, stressful place. Well, these are just sort of the big things that I see in terms of having a big impact on the way that we understand the internet. A pretty big shift happens in 2018. Trump signed SESTA FOSTA into law. If you don't know, FOSTA stands for Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, and SESTA stands for Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. And essentially, these are legislation ostensibly meant to combat sex trafficking online, but it's super broad and it has very big consequences for our internet landscape in general. Back then, Tumblr is bought by Verizon, the parent company of Yahoo, and subsequently bans adult content. So something you need to know about Tumblr was that it was really a platform that, for lack of a better way to put it, was kind of about weirdos connecting with other weirdos. And so it really enabled weirdos to find their people, other weirdos. It was a platform kind of built around identity and self-discovery, which included adult material. So you might be thinking that I mean things like pornography, but I also mean things like, creative works like fan fiction and becoming a beacon for queer folks and trans folks, people who did not necessarily see themselves reflected elsewhere, being able to find their people. And so, when I say adult content, I don't just mean pornographic material, adult content in the way of like explorations of identity. So when Tumblr banned adult content, it did not just impact the horny community. Anyone looking to learn to explore gender, sexuality, identity was essentially shut out by this one policy change. And I think that we still see the impact of this today. I see a lot of this conflated with the way that any and all sexual content is conflated with pornography or being a threat to children in ways that I think really mirror our current discourse. And I also think, importantly, this was a big indicator that the vision of the internet as this place where niche weirdos could connect and gather safely online was kind of coming to an end. The move demonstrated that the modern internet experience is going to be much less about exploration and community and much more about commodification. Verizon bought Tumblr because they're a company and they wanted to make money, and they thought that buying Tumblr would be a way to make money, and they could sell ads, they could monetize, they could work with payment processors. But because of that legislation, SESTA FOSTA, they would need to crack down on adult content to achieve that. So I think we see this big shift as the internet experience kind of shifting what it's supposed to be about. I'm old enough that I can remember when people talked about the internet as this democratized space where it was going to be this like online utopia full of big possibilities. Talk more about that in just a moment. But with this shift, it was like the internet powers that be said, no, the internet is going to be about corporate interests, commodification, and money, not community. So another big thing that I would say really kind of has marked my understanding of the internet and how we got to this place that feels so heavy and so dark and intense sometimes is just this baseline distrust and hostility toward marginalized people. If you look on the right and left sides of my slides here, this is a textile artist, Qualisha Wood, who makes textile art about the internet and how the ways that it both consumes and is hostile toward Black women's experiences online. On the right, she has these headlines on her quilt that say like, ebony babes online minding their own business, right? Like this idea that when we show up online, we're always going to be sort of scrutinized and consumed and surveilled. So I would actually argue that there's a hostility toward marginalized people at the heart of our internet experience. I think that is baked into the experience of being online. It is a bug. It is a feature, not a bug. And I feel this quite innately when I show up online. All of the words that you all use to describe what your online experiences feel like, I feel that innately when I'm online. When it comes to the internet, I think that people who are marginalized, whether you're a Black woman, a trans person, a queer person, or marginalized in some other way, I think that we are both, we're sort of at this duality point where we are at once consumed and an object of imitation and fascination, while also being objects of ridicule, hostility, and disgust. When it comes to the internet, we are meant to be surveilled and consumed. The idea that we are creating or building is sort of never really comes up, other than the fact that we are meant to be sort of surveilled, watched, and scrutinized. A great example is this piece in Gizmodo that came out in 2010. A white male tech reporter wrote about his attempt to follow more people who were not like him on Twitter. Now, this could have been like a really fruitful thought exercise, but the way that he framed it was why I stalk a sexy Black woman on Twitter and why you should too. And so the fact that he felt like that was the framing that was going to work most for this thought exercise really kind of goes back to this idea of our experience on social media being an experience of, voyeurism, and it's almost sort of creepy, right? Using the word stalk. So when I say things like racism and misogyny are built into our online infrastructure, people often think that I mean it sort of glibly, like it's just something that you say, but I mean it quite literally. And oftentimes it is like a direct and explicit engagement strategy. Platforms make money off of participating in demeaning marginalized people online. I often talk about that experience from the identity of a Black woman, but it's not just us. Have you ever wondered why brands were tweeting about that so-called feud a couple weeks ago between Selena Gomez and Hailey Bieber, or why brands were tweeting about Amber Heard? It's because trafficking in things like racism and misogyny drive engagement. precisely because those are built into our online experience. And so I want to give you a couple of quick examples of some ways that I've seen this playing out. So folks probably remember Janet Jackson, 2004 Super Bowl, wardrobe malfunction while she's performing with Justin Timberlake. Well, what folks might not know is that this is actually the moment that led to YouTube being founded. The founders of YouTube were on record saying that, when they started YouTube, it was just going to be a dating site where people were going to log on and make videos about the kind of people they were interested in dating. And that wasn't really working for them. People didn't want to make videos about what they were looking for in a date. And then they watched the Super Bowl and they were all talking about it one day. And the co-founder of YouTube said, wouldn't it be great if people could see and share the video of the incident whenever they wanted? And that became the YouTube that we have today. And so you can see how this desire to consume and commodify a Black woman's body on demand led to this thing that is like a pretty big part of our internet ecosystem today. Similarly, Jennifer Lopez goes to the Grammys in 2000 in this beautiful, fantastic, like stunning dress. And this dress is actually the reason, in part, why we have Google Images. Kathy Edwards, the head of engineering at Google Images, told GQ that in 2000, Google had a pretty small team. They already knew that they wanted to make an image-based search engine at some point, but they weren't really prioritizing it. They didn't really know if this was going to be something that would work. They were sort of like putting it on the back burner. And then J-Lo goes to the Grammys in this dress. And I remember this dress was all anybody was talking about, right? And so this moment made the Google team realize that they needed to prioritize Google Images. They needed to prioritize a search engine so that people could find this dress, find this image, and talk about it and consume it however they wanted. Another great example is Facebook. So Mark Zuckerberg has been on the record recently saying that the reason why he was inspired to make Facebook was the Iraq war protests. That is some like real revisionist history that's just not correct. It is part of the public record that he started Facebook while he was at Harvard, and he wanted to compare the looks of women in his dorm. He said, I mean, this is only part of the quote. If you want to find the full quote, it is pretty gross. So basically, he wanted to just like rate women in his dorm. So he created an app called Face Mash, which later became Facebook. And all of this is to say that our position as marginalized people is such an interesting one in terms of the internet. We are at once the inspiration for so much of our internet infrastructure, but that reality is also ignored, overlooked, and erased, but still felt, right? It's the reason why when you show up on social media, you feel all those things that you all said before. We're visible, but also erased. And that allows for the conditions for us to be harmed while that harm is able to sort of go unexamined until it just becomes the norm, just the way things are. And I would argue that that is where we're at right now. But imagine an internet designed by and for, and in a way that centers its most marginalized users. I believe that that is possible. And I believe that there's power in that. When marginalized folks take up space online, we can create an internet ecosystem that works for everyone. So I want to take a little bit of a flashback and tell you a bit about me. So the reason why I care about this and the reason why I know this so innately is because this is kind of my story. My story is a story of the internet that is grounded in things like self-discovery, identity, creativity, and how all of these things can join forces in service of building a better internet. And this is important because the future of our democracy, the future of our discourse depends on building a better internet. I say this a lot, and when I say it, people just think it's like a catchy thing to say. But actually, when I say that we need to build a better internet, I mean that in the most literal sense possible. We need to build a feminist, anti-racist, queer, and trans-affirming internet. And I think that all of our futures depend on it. So talking about the future makes me want to talk about the past. So this is me in high school. Got my St. Gertrude's blazer on. I think I had just gotten my braces off that year, so I thought I was like hot shit. I had my braces off. And I was just this like oddball, kind of awkward, queer Black kid growing up in Midlothian, Virginia. If you're familiar with Midlothian, it's not really the Midlothian that it is now. The piece of trivia I always give about Midlothian is that it was the basis for the town in the movie Donnie Darko, which if you've seen that movie, I don't think is like a winning endorsement. It was like a perfectly fine place to come of age, but I spent a lot of my time there feeling really out of place, wondering what was wrong with me, if I'd ever feel like I belonged. And I remember like late at night, lying on my back in bed, looking up at these glow in the dark sticker stars that I had on my ceiling. And it was only really like late at night that I would let these scared, anxious thoughts in. Thoughts like, I'll probably never leave Midlothian. I'll probably live my whole life here and never feel whatever it is that you're supposed to feel in life. It was like I was lonely for something that I didn't even know existed, that I hadn't even encountered yet. It's a pretty specific thing to be feeling this level of hopelessness about the possibilities for your future at all of age 13. And then one day, my dad came home and he had a computer, and it was this gray, gigantic, boxy monstrosity that took up our whole desk. And he set it up in this room that would be known as our computer room. And it was the kind of room that, like, if my dad saw you in there with like a soda or something to eat, you were in huge trouble. And this computer came with America Online. America Online was how America got online, like back in the day. You would log on, it would make these horrible noises. If your mom picked up the phone to make a phone call while you were on it, it ruined everything. And this was the day that everything changed for me. It was like my parents had come home with a pair of wings. And I remember all of a sudden, all of these different people and the way they lived their lives all over the world, I had instant access to. It was like a fire hose and I couldn't get enough of it. And suddenly there was this window to connection, self-discovery, identity. And for the first time, really in my whole life, I started to get a sense of who I am, where I fit in the world, and what life would mean for me. And all of that is thanks to the internet. Now, for me, growing up, the internet felt like freedom, exploration, self-discovery, creativity, all of these things that were really new and exciting and positive at the time. I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea that like all the experiences I was having there were positive. I'm completely certain I was showing up in places, doing things I probably had no business doing, but it didn't feel like a marketplace for my pain, a marketplace for negativity. And I feel like the internet today feels so different. It feels like harm. It feels like chaos. It feels like mistrust. You know, the internet that I had then was not the internet that we have today. Today, our identities, the thing that I was exploring online, are weaponized. And I really want to make sure that the next generation has an internet landscape like I did. I want to follow the tradition of women and people of color and queer folks who are making the internet better, because I know that it really matters. I think that we can make the internet better by creating content and conversations that make these issues accessible and make sure that everybody feels like they have a seat at the table. So I want to quickly talk about some of the harms that I've been seeing in my work that manifest online. Things like disinformation, online harassment, algorithmic harm, and media manipulation. And coincidentally, these are all things that I think marginalized people have really been speaking up about. Unfortunately, they're often ignored. And this stuff really matters. It's not just things that happen online and that like, oh, you can just shut your computer if you have a problem with it. The state of our internet, specifically things like mis and disinformation, online abuse, these are racial justice issues, they are gender justice issues, they are class justice issues, because we cannot have an equitable media landscape or a functioning democracy while our communication platforms are just cesspools of hate and harassment and disinformation. Our experiences IRL are deeply connected to the health, safety, and well-being of our internet. And the research makes this really clear, right? So for instance, when racialized gendered disinformation is allowed to fester online, people become less likely to trust Black women and women of color as leaders, preventing us from being able to participate in a representative democracy. So this is something that I see a very clear through line to. What happens online deeply impacts what happens IRL. So I want to stop for a moment and talk a little bit about some of the women who have shared their stories on the podcast about trying to raise the alarm about what they have seen online and how it is impacting all of us. So I will turn to my audio clips and they are going to work perfectly. All right, so we're going to hear a clip from a woman named Shafika Hudson. Oops, dang it. Okay. Shafika Hudson's story is super interesting to me because it really was a starting place for me in starting the podcast. Shafika's story is that she was just a regular social media user, was a power user of Twitter, was really active in Black feminist online communities on Twitter. And then one day she sees this person tweeting just really inflammatory things that don't really make a lot of sense. It's a person whose image on Twitter purports to be a Black woman, but this person is saying things that Shafika, as a Black woman, knows no Black woman would actually say. They're saying things like, end Father's Day because Black men don't deserve to be celebrated because they spend too much time with white women. Things that are clearly meant to be inflammatory, but also in ways that don't make a ton of sense. So Shafika realizes this is actually a coordinated effort to destabilize Black feminist online spaces. And she creates a hashtag, your slip is showing, to call them out. If you are curious what that means, your slip is showing is kind of a polite Southern auntie way of saying that someone is not looking as put together as they think that they are. And so here is a little bit of Shafika's story in her own words. Even at a time where we're having conversations around women's experiences online, why do you think your slip is showing and End Father's Day and the way that women and folks of color have been harassed online pretty much goes overlooked? Why do you think that is?
And again, it's frustrating. And my theory remains it's because the targeted group at the time for the End Father's Day 4chan operation were Black women. It's honestly, I have no other answer at this point. It's been 6 years. I've watched this just kind of repeatedly happen. And the only answer, unfortunately, that I have is that, okay, well, this is being largely ignored and erased because of who the targets were. And the targets were Black women, particularly Black feminists.
We'll be right back after this quick break. People who are traditionally marginalized online, like Black women, are specifically impacted by things like disinformation and harassment on social media. The ultimate goal is to freak them out so much that they'll shut down their social media and just stop talking. Here's Dr. Donovan again.
Yeah, so we have to remember that a lot of the ways in which disinformation is carried through networks are also related to the ways in which people are harassed online. You know, so if you're, there's a concept called gender trolling. It's evolved into trans trolling, race trolling, queer trolling, where the characteristics of your identity become the thing that they focus on, and there'll be a swarm of folks that have coordinated in some other place, usually on a message board, and they will target specific public figures or women or trans folks or prominent Black activists in order to get them to shut off their social media. And
so I'll stop it there. And so I apologize, I forgot to introduce the other voice that you heard, which was Dr. Joan Donovan, formerly of Harvard. And so the reason I wanted to start with that clip is because Shafika's story, I think, is one that is sort of a story that really grounds so much of the stuff I talk about on the podcast, right? Shafika was just a normal person who uncovered inauthentic, coordinated behavior on a social media platform. She reported it, she created a tool to stamp it out and curb it and help identify it, and she organized others in her community to do the same to curb it. And when she brought this to Twitter high-ups, they basically just ignored it. And so what's interesting is that flash forward a couple of years later, and we know per a Senate inquiry that these same kind of tactics targeting the same communities, Black folks online, were used by bad actors to try to disrupt our elections. And so my question is a question that comes up a lot on the show that is sort of a through line is, what if people with power had listened to Shafiqa? What if instead of saying like, oh, we're going to ignore this issue because it's happening to Black women and we don't really care about them, we have an innate hostility toward them, we're going to overlook this, would it have seemed like such an effective tactic to go on to try to disrupt our elections? I would argue probably not. So another voice that I want to spotlight is Shireen Mitchell. Shireen is the founder of Stop Online Violence Against Women. She's a researcher, and her research is uplifting all of the ways that online tactics, the same that Shafiqa was uncovering, are used to disrupt our elections and our voting habits. I'm going to play a little clip from her as well. Also, y'all, sorry, this is like, I'm trying to navigate between different tabs and it's a little awkward. So bear with me. Okay. Shireen wanted to reimagine the internet as a space where women and girls of color could feel supported, heard, and protected. But she also couldn't shake the idea that maybe these spaces weren't so safe for these women and girls. And that assumed lack of safety was a big problem.
In those moments, there were moments where I had to have conversations with parents, especially moms, saying, your daughter will be safe if I teach her how to code. Your daughter will be safe if she goes online. Because that was one of the reasons why they unplugged their daughters, but they had their sons go run amok online in any form, right? It was the fear factor harms on their daughters. In some ways, there's a part of me that said, here we are in 2020, and I was lying to those moms, didn't know I was lying. Because it wasn't just them being worried about predators, because that really wasn't the thing they had to worry the most about. They had to worry about their surroundings more than that. It was about the industry of which that would be built to target them and target them in a way that no one would show up to protect them in any fashion. So when I formed Stop Online Violence Against Women, I specifically formed it because I wanted to have a sense of what women of color saw and what their experience was online. But it was that moment that I started to look at the work around looking at what online violence and online harassment looked like specifically to women of color, because it was different than white women. It was different than men in general, but also white men and specifically.
Disinformation, especially when it's weaponized against women and people of color, doesn't just stay online. It can have real-world consequences, like voter suppression or the kind of violence we saw at the Capitol. And this has been a focus of Shireen's work. So how have you seen disinformation play out, especially as it pertains to women of color online?
Yes, absolutely. And you and I know about women like Shafiqa Hudson and Anissa Crockett, who basically helped to identify, fake accounts pretending to be Black women. It's looking at the way in which people of color, Black people specifically, are trying to change their environment, trying to stop the harassment, trying to stop being killed by the state, trying to stop all these things that are happening to them and their communities. And they're seen as the problem of which they should not be protected, but also of which that any violence upon them is acceptable, whether it's digital violence or in real life violence, which we know now has translated to organizing events like what happened in Kenosha, right? We have seen this trajectory. What I'm saying is I have witnessed it and I've collected data on that trajectory. I'm saying I not only know that this was going to happen where we are in 2020, is that I have been trying to tell us and prepare us for it before we got here. My report in the beginning of January 2020 that really defined what digital voter suppression was to define what we had already collected data on, targeting Black voters, then which we define campaigns to do so, of which to give strategies to stop it. And nothing has been done. We have still not been protected. We have systems in place, not only from tech companies, but even our government systems that are accepting harms against us.
So I'll stop that there. Something that really jumps out at me about that clip with Shireen speaking is her anger. I remember this interview very distinctively, and Shireen was pissed. She was pissed that she felt that she had been unlistened to and overlooked. She was pissed that she had been authoring these research reports and these studies that indicated that some kind of large-scale political violence was going to happen because of racialized disinformation online. And then January 6th happened. We spoke, I think, a couple weeks after January 6th, and she was really angry. And I think, you can really hear the frustration in her voice when she tells her story. And it really speaks to that point that I mentioned earlier about kind of hostility toward the marginalized being at the heart of so many of our online experiences. That if you're harmed online, you can be blamed for your own, the harm that you experience. Another one I wanted to briefly listen to is Sophie Zhang. Sophie's story is really interesting. She was a engineer at Facebook, and a year before Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, spoke out, Sophie, who worked at Facebook, uncovered that Facebook was either slow to act or in some cases did nothing to stop coordinated fake campaigns by foreign governments who were manipulating their citizens to destabilize democracies. While working at Facebook, she found that governments in places like India, Ukraine, Spain, Brazil, Bolivia, and Ecuador were essentially using fake Facebook accounts in a coordinated effort to generate fake engagement to manipulate their citizenry. When she reported this, Facebook pretty much did nothing. And so she took it upon herself, on top of her official job at Facebook, to flag and combat these fake accounts. So if you ask me, Sophie probably should have been promoted or given a raise, but instead she was fired for that work. And when Frances Haugen came out with her Facebook papers a year later, nobody had any trouble rightly calling Haugen a whistleblower. But with Sophie, sometimes she was rarely called a whistleblower, and sometimes she was even described as a disgruntled former employee. And Sophie says that this happened to her because she is a woman of color, Frances Haugen is not, because she is autistic, and because, as she puts it, she is not as polished as Frances Haugen was. She didn't present the same way. And so she wasn't really treated as a whistleblower at all. So I want to play a little bit of our conversation from the podcast. There we go. So you said earlier that you're an idealist. When you think about Facebook, is there part of you that is hopeful that you think that it can be saved? Can it be a force for good, or is it just too late?
Anything can be theoretically changed. The question is, will it happen? Maybe Mark will have a change of heart tomorrow. I can't read his mind. I can't read the future. But fundamentally, I realize that cynicism and nihilism is in vogue in the modern day. It's very attractive for people to say, the world is fundamentally broken and can't be fixed, therefore I'm not going to do anything. And thus it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then you can say, I was right, nothing changed. Because in the end, nothing will happen unless we, the people, make it happen. And so the question of will anything happen, that's really up to us. It's up to yourself. It's up to me. It's up to the people listening. And am I working myself? Yes, I am. But that doesn't mean I can do it alone. I'm not a superhero.
So I love Sophie's story so much. One of the things that I want to highlight from Sophie's story is that something that came up in the episode was the fact that she considers herself a little, like myself, a little bit of a nervous speaker. When she gets nervous, she stutters. When she does interviews, she stutters. We talked a bit about how she feels that warped the public perception of her as a whistleblower, as somebody who could confidently speak truth to power. But this is one of the reasons why podcasting is such an important medium, because that's part of the story, right? When you hear Sophie talk, you can hear in her voice what she is describing as something that she feels has been impactful in the way that people perceive her. If she wrote about this in an op-ed, you wouldn't really be able to understand and really viscerally get what she's talking about. But the podcast narrative really allows for what Sophie is saying about her experience as a tech whistleblower to come through. So I'm not gonna play the next clip. She's incredible, Afoma Uzoma, but I want to make sure that we can get through the whole thing. So you should listen to the episode with her because she is amazing, but I won't play her whole clip. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about is sort of why this work, right? I believe in the power of the internet. I believe in telling the story of all the ways that marginalized people have really shaped the internet. This piece in Wired by Sadet Harry called "Listening to Black Women, the Innovation That Tech Can't Figure Out" was a seminal piece in how I came up with the podcast. Basically, she's talking about how tech journalism essentially should be there to hold the industry accountable through access and insight. But tech journalists don't really see the way that marginalized people have shown up or been erased online. And so if the guard of people who are telling the story of technology in the way that marginalized voices have shaped it are really not equipped to see us that way, that it's just going to be replicating that same erasure. And so this piece was seminal to how I came up with the podcast and how the podcast sort of came to be in its current iteration. And so I want to talk briefly about the podcast and how I came to be the host of it. So there are no girls on the internet is like a saying that's kind of said to be like an informal rule of the internet that posits that everyone on the internet who says that they are a woman is just pretending, or less literally, but like just as harmful, that our identities online don't really matter when you show up on the internet, right? That like if you're a woman online, that doesn't matter when you log on. Both of these things are untrue, but they're both things that I believed for a long time. And this is a real problem because technology and the internet is a domain where marginalized people should be taking up a lot of space because it's women, people of color, Black folks, queer folks, trans folks, people who are traditionally marginalized who have been showing up online to make it better, safer, more fun, more creative, and more inclusive. And we've been there since the very beginning. And the reason is that I didn't necessarily see a lot of marginalized voices when I thought about the internet or technology wasn't because we weren't there, it was because we were overlooked or worse, intentionally silenced or erased. And this is not okay because you really cannot tell any true story about the internet without including us. Folks from traditionally marginalized backgrounds have always been there since the very beginning, and we're often there doing the unpaid, often dangerous, often personally costly work of making technology safer and better. When we do that work, it doesn't just make technology better for us, marginalized people, it makes these spaces better for everyone. When people with power meaningfully center and amplify marginalized voices, we all benefit. I believe deeply, deeply in the power of the internet and technology to create real change because I saw it myself back when I was that kid on the clunky desktop computer in my computer room. But I also think it will take a real reckoning of the harm and erasing of marginalized voices in tech for folks with power to get comfortable ceding that power to folks who are traditionally marginalized to have that happen. And I think it's important to really go beyond platitudes and make visible the ways that marginalized people have both impacted the internet experience and have been erased from it. And that's sort of what I want to do with the podcast. The podcast is both about archival work. It's about, being able to say that these people, these marginalized people who are so deeply impactful of our internet experience, being able to say, like, here were their contributions. This is what they did in their own words. Nobody can take that away from them. And it's about encouraging listeners to feel like they can take up space in conversations about technology in the internet, even if they're not techies, even if they don't know how to code, even if they, are just people who the only access to the internet or technology is like scrolling Facebook on their iPhone. If you are somebody who shows up online in any capacity, you have a right to take up space in conversations about technology. And I think that podcasting has been an incredible medium for me in order to help people really see that. Okay, so why podcasting? This is a good question. I have always sort of thought of myself as like a creative type. I guess I would say I was a creative type who never found my medium until I found podcasting. Audio and podcasting is just what I knew. I listened to podcasts like I consumed every podcast that was out there back in the day when like there were only a couple of them. And so I just knew the landscape. I've been working in podcasting for about 11 years. So yes, even before the podcast serial was a thing. And funny story is that I actually lied on my resume to get my first ever podcasting job. I said that I knew how to edit audio. And when I was doing my resume, I was like, how hard could it be? And then I got the job. And then I was like, oh crap, I actually have to learn how to edit audio. But luckily, you can actually learn pretty much everything you need to know on your own. Like you didn't have, like nobody who I knew who was in the space at that time around like 2011, 2010, nobody like went to college for it. Nobody had like taken classes in it. We were all just like doing it, learning how to do it on the fly. And so that was one of the reasons I was so drawn to the medium of podcasting because it felt like a space for weirdos who were interested in telling stories about whatever niche interest they had. And another reason why I was sort of compelled to use podcasting as a creative medium to make the kinds of internet changes that I'm talking about in this presentation was that, when you look at the tech podcast charts on Apple, the tech podcasts that are by and for marginalized people, so often they are about like if you're a woman, how to get a job in tech. If you're a Black person, how to make smart crypto investments or something. And no shade to those people, like we need all the content that we can get. But I was looking around and I didn't see the conversations about, how like the beautiful narrative stories about our experiences in tech. I know that our experiences as marginalized people in technology are so unique and dynamic and have so much depth and richness. But when I looked around, I didn't see those stories being told. I felt like I was being told that the only story that really mattered for marginalized people in tech was extractive, how to make money from it, how to commodify it. And I wanted to have stories that were more about exploring it, about creativity, about possibility, right? And so that was another reason why the medium of podcasting really spoke to me. But yeah, it was just the medium that I knew. And in case you're curious, these are all images from my various times in podcasting. And upper right-hand corner is actually the most recent one. I was on vacation in Mexico at the beach, and I had a podcast emergency, or I had to get some VO to somebody. But I was unfortunately staying in an open air hut right on the beach. And so can't exactly turn down the ocean. And I had to make this fort of pillows and get inside of it with my microphone to get any kind of like quietness to record. So that's what's going on there. Also, podcasting has been a great way to just reach people and to like give them a message that feels trustworthy. Half of all Americans listen to podcasts. Most listeners prefer to hear their news rather than read it. And 87% of listeners trust accuracy of information that they learn from podcasts when compared to television news or written news, right? And so I knew that I wanted to use this podcast to create actual social change. And so it seemed like the perfect medium to do that, given all of this. Another thing about podcasting is that it's so intimate, right? Like I sometimes fall asleep listening to my favorite podcasts in my earbuds. It is an intimate relationship between the host and the listener. If you read a book on the subway or on the bus, everybody can see what that book is, right? But if you've got headphones on the bus, nobody knows what you're listening to. That is between you and that host. And so it's often said that podcasting is the best way to scale intimacy. And I really deeply believe that. Another reason why it kind of works as a medium is because when you read things, if you read an op-ed or an article or something, oftentimes it's really heady, right? It's facts, it's figures. Podcasting allows to easily bring in some of the hardiness, the feelingsiness of these conversations. Even somebody who, might be on my side, who might think like, oh yeah, it's important that we have a healthy internet, online harassment is bad, yada, yada, yada. Hearing someone explain in their own words how that shows up for them, hearing them stutter when they get nervous, or hearing their voice crack, or hearing them struggle to put their thoughts and feelings into words, that can really ground a listener in that experience in a way that moves them in a way that headiness could never do. And so podcasting really allows for this effective balance of heady and hearty, like feelingsy. And just in general, I'm a feelingsy person, so it just makes sense. So as I start to wrap up here, I want to leave you with a couple of like, so what ideas. The internet is our rightful domain. Platforms would not exist without us. And tech leaders should be accountable to us as their users. There is no version of the internet that exists without us, just regular, everyday people who are not necessarily coders or engineers, but who use the technology that these people make. And so I want to kind of shift the power balance, and so that these folks understand that they need to be accountable to us, not the other way around. And even if you're not a techie, even if you're not a coder, you need to understand that your voice matters and that you've got a right to take up space. When I used to, for the longest time, despite working at a tech company, say, I'm not really somebody in tech, I'm not really a techie. And I realize now that I was only letting tech billionaires get away with harm and making money from my negative experiences without me really being able to check in on it. And so if I could leave you with one thing today, it is that taking up space in these conversations about the internet, we could change the world. And also, you are not stupider than Elon Musk. None of you listening is stupider than Elon Musk. It benefits tech billionaires for us to think we cannot understand these conversations. These tech billionaires are too smart. When they talk, I don't know what they're talking about. Who am I to have an opinion? That is not true. Each and every one of you is an expert in your own internet experience, and you are not stupider than Elon Musk. And when we allow for tech billionaires to tell us that we don't understand what they're saying, we're not smart enough to understand what they've built and these platforms and how they work, we let them win. So don't let them win. And I will leave it there. This has been so fun. I'm so excited to take some of your questions and comments. Thank you for listening to me talk for an hour.
Bridget, thank you so much. You said, I'm a nervous speaker. No, you're not. You're a fabulous speaker. Totally helped me the whole time. I'm like, say more stuff, say more stuff. There was a question that we missed in the chat, so I'd like to get that one if we could, which is the name of the podcast where you discuss AI, because that's a hot commodity here on the campus. So I'm sure that's why that question was asked. So what is the name of that podcast, please?
It's called IRL, IRL, Online Life is Real Life, and it's by Mozilla, the makers of Firefox. Also, fun fact, we just found out we won a Webby this morning for Best Tech Podcast, so we're all kind of like very excited. But yeah, it really explores kind of who has power in AI, the promise, but also the peril of AI. It's fantastic. I wish I could take credit for, I'm just the host. I wish I could take credit for putting it together, but it is a fantastic podcast.
Congratulations on your award. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna, as I wait for people to put their questions in chat, I am gonna ask, if you don't mind, a couple of questions that I have. One of them is, you said 87% of people trust the accuracy of hearing when they hear a podcast. Do you think that may shift as the earlier thing that you mentioned with Twitter, where people are going to be unverified, like there may be sort of more people entering that space that may confuse that issue a little bit?
Oof, what a good question. This is something that keeps me up at night. I think that right now, how can I put this? It's so that quote about people, or that stat about people feeling like what they consume in podcasts is accurate. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because why podcasting is a great medium is that it's democratized. Anybody can start one, anybody can say anything about anything for the most part. And so I would say that even right now, we're kind of in that weird wild, wild west of verified and unverified podcast creators being able to make content. And so it's one of the reasons why podcasts are like a specific vector for misinformation. Like when people who have been listening to Joe Rogan in their ears every day for 10 years, it's going to be really hard for them to be like, oh, is what he's saying not true? Because they have a relationship. And so it is both like can be kind of a risk, but also it can be an opportunity, because people who are give accurate information can also show up in these spaces and also build those kinds of relationships that allow for that kind of honest, accurate information to spread. And so I would say, long story long, I think that we're kind of in that unverified place when it comes to podcasts. And that's why it's so important that folks, if you're a podcaster, put out accurate information, be willing to do the research, get a second party opinion. And when someone is not doing that, it's important that we really understand that as an audience and have a critical ear when we're listening to these podcasts.
Right. If it sounds fantastical, it perhaps is fantastical.
Exactly.
Right. The world is flat. I don't think so. So my other question for you is more of a personal question, and please feel free to tell me that it's too personal and you're not interested in answering it. But I was wondering if you could speak maybe a little bit to the exhaustion of constantly fighting for a space and to be heard. I mean, are there days when you're like, heck with this, I'm going to move to a mountain and live on the top and just not even pay attention to anybody and hang out with goats, right? I don't want to deal with any of this
Oh my God, I love this question. I love this question. So one is that I actually do spend intentionally quite a lot of time, not with goats, but like on the mountain, metaphorically. Like a good day for me is a day where I'm not on the internet. A good day for me is a day that I'm like hiking or by a body of water or out in nature, right? And so I'm really specific about building in that time intentionally into my life. It is hard. Like, you know, when I asked earlier about how people feel about the internet and the words they would use to describe it, that really spoke to me. That's my experience as well. And so I yearn for the days when it felt like joy and creativity and exploration, but these days it more feels like a slog. And so I find myself showing up less and less. Like I haven't tweeted about anything personally in a very long time because it's just not worth it sometimes. And so if anybody is dealing with this in their own life, I would say, you know, if certain social media experiences are not bringing you joy, you don't have to show up there, right? I understand, like somebody said that they were a writer. I understand that if you are a content creator or a business owner, you kind of have to be on these platforms. I totally get it, but you get to decide how much of yourself you want to give to those platforms. And these days, I'm giving a lot less of myself to these platforms, and I'm learning a lot about how I can sort of preserve my own energy, my own intentions, and not just feel like I'm, you know, in this combative, reactive space all the time, because that's what this experience of being online feels like for me.
I'm glad you're taking that time because it means we will hold on to you longer in the space, which is wonderful. So we have some questions from the chat. If you're okay staying with us for a little bit longer.
Of course.
Excuse me, where are people going from Twitter as users? There are too many competitors. Do you see a front runner?
Oof, I don't know. That's a great question. For a while, I thought it might be Mastodon. And now it kind of seems like maybe that's not really popping off the way we thought. I really don't know. It's kind of tough because I think that it would be great if it was like, oh, we're all going here, everybody meet me here. But I just haven't seen that happen. And it's so hard. I feel like, particularly for marginalized communities, folks are like building these online spaces and infrastructures and having to like up and rebuild someplace else. It's so disruptive. And so I wish I had an answer. If y'all find out, let me know. I'll meet y'all there.
Thank you. Yeah, lots of competition. Are there clear ways that companies like Facebook can really do better, do a lot better with content issues like racism, transphobia, and misinformation? What are they, if so?
Yeah, so at Ultraviolet, we are putting out recommendations for the ways that platforms can be less hostile to marginalized people. You can go to feministnet.org to find out more. I'll answer the question generally and for Facebook. Generally, there are plenty of things that platforms can do to make their spaces safer. Reddit is a perfect example. I kind of came up on Reddit as my like big social media platform that I spent a lot of time. In a million years, I would never have thought that Reddit would be the place that I would be championing as a place where they have really made some strides in content moderation, but they have, and they've done it through things like having a very clear, enforceable, transparent policy. When I say these things, I feel like people often think that I'm like a social media scold, like I want no one should be able to say anything. And that's so far from the truth. What we actually want is consistent, clear policies that anyone can read and say, okay, that was a policy that got me banned, or okay, this is why this speech is not bannable, right? And so that is a universal thing that benefits everybody, all ideologies, everybody, right? And so that's really the thing, is like having clear, consistent, enforceable, and transparent policies that anybody could see and understand and have a sense of, you know, what happened. Because there are folks who like ideologically I probably am not aligned with, who say like, oh, I got banned from this platform and I have no idea why. I don't like these people. I'm not friends with these people, but you should be able to say, this is the behavior that got me banned from this platform. And here is that policy, you know, clear as day on the website. It should be a lot more transparent. But I would say in terms of Facebook, this might be like a hot take. I think, in my personal opinion, I don't think that Facebook can really be reformed. I think it sort of just needs to like shut down and cease to exist. Like the best thing that they could do at this point is like stop existing. So that's how I feel about Facebook in particular. Yeah, Thank you,
Oh,
Janet.
not a huge fan. Okay.
Not a huge fan. No, I still have it. So I'm like, what are you going to do?
What thoughts do you have about forming an audience in the podcast field? I think about how the various podcast apps don't have very robust discovery pages, amen, or ways to filter shows by topic very well. How do hosts and listeners find their people?
Ooh. Feel that question.
Yeah.
It is I mean, like you probably know, right? Like discoverability is so hard. And I'll talk all day. What is so frustrating is when you are built like having conversations that people need to hear, would like to hear. There's an audience out there, but you just kind of feel like you're screaming into the void. I would say the most important is definitely like consistent content, like making good content consistently. That's sort of the only like cheat code that I would say that I've been using is kind of in like podcasting is sort of a community, right? And so like I will be a guest host on people who have similar audiences to my show. They'll be guest hosts on mine. We'll sort of like do feed swaps, things like that. That's the only consistent way that I have found that actually grows an audience. And even that is like slow going and it's a ton of work because like you're trying to make a podcast. Maybe you also have a full-time job and like a life and a family. Having to prioritize, setting up feed swaps and finding podcasts to ask if you can be a guest on and all of that is like a lot of work. But yeah, that's the only thing that I have found that consistently works. And I'll also say one other thing is that don't worry about size of audience. Like if you're making a podcast, I would rather have 100 listeners who are dedicated listeners to the show and like really get what I'm doing and are my people than 1 million listeners who are like flaky, kind of like, I don't know, right? And so like, even if you build an audience of like, that's pretty small, if that audience really fucks with your work and like really gets what you're doing and is on board, that is actually going to be more powerful and ultimately like more lucrative when it comes to ad sales and stuff than a huge audience of people who are kind of like, oh, I put that podcast on when I'm done with all my real podcasts that I like. So yeah, don't worry about size, worry about the type of audience that you're building.
If I may, I would agree with that. We get, I don't know, maybe 100 downloads each episode. And I'm actually fine with that because those are people who are in the same wonky space that I'm in with our podcast. What do you think of accessibility slowly coming to the forefront on social media? For instance, alt text, captioning, etc.
Way too slow. I'm happy that it's happening, but like some of these, like Twitter is a $1 billion global company. The fact that they did some of these accessibility features, they didn't roll out until recently. I'm glad that they're there, but they should really be examining whose experience they are centering and championing with their platforms. Like for these big companies, there is no reason for some of these accessibility tools to be being rolled out so slowly. In the podcast space, I started my podcast in 2020. I'm on iHeartRadio, which is the biggest podcast network in the country. And I mean, I don't want to like tell tales out of school, but I was like, oh, so can we get how do I get the transcripts of the show up on the site? And at the time they were like, oh, we don't really do transcripts as like a automatic thing. You'll need to take the episode, put the file into this AI software, and then someone's going to have to go through, like a human is going to have to go through and like edit it to make sure that the captioning software works. And I was like, this is a huge media company. What do you mean you don't have captions? Like, what about people who have accessibility needs where they can't listen to a podcast? I mean, I'm not like, I read transcripts of podcasts and I'm a podcaster. And so I would say, especially for like big companies that have the resources, if they are not prioritizing accessibility needs, that is like a decision, a choice, a prioritization choice. It's not because they can't, it's because somebody has made a choice that it's not as important. And so I'm happy to see accessibility norms increasing. I think some of the things that are like Twitter's alt text, you have to go in and type in the alt text of an image. I think that they could probably figure out how to make it so that like it's automatic. But yeah, I think it's better late than never, but very late.
Are they now with a transcripting company to follow that up? Are you provided transcripts now, or do you have to still go out of your way to do that?
Great question. I am provided transcripts, but it's still a bit of a slog. It still involves a lot of like personal labor. And I could understand why like a podcaster who doesn't really have a lot of time, it's just like, oh, I'm not gonna do it. I think that like, I do it because I think it's important, but I can understand why some people don't do it, but it needs to be a normalized thing where like, it's just automatic so that it becomes the norm, right? So it's not like something that that like someone does because they think it's important, where it's like just the expected thing. That's how you get like meaningful institutional change.
When I get my files and I see 11 inaudibles, I'm like, oh, because that's more work, right?
Yeah.
When I see 0, I'm like, yay. So sorry, we have another question. Thinking of the folks who have to screen toxic comments /post materials, are we any closer to finding ways to get AI to do that for us so that those people don't have to be in those positions?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm so glad that you asked. So many of the people who are doing that incredibly tough work are people overseas. It's the global community in the global South and places like that. And we just outsource so much of that very intense labor, and we don't even really think about the cost. And that's like the story of how it goes, I guess. I think that this is not my like expertise. Like it's a little above my pay grade. I'm not an AI expert. I would say that I don't think that we're in a place where AI only can be making moderation decisions. I think that AI is progressing really rapidly with what it can do. But I think that so often, like when we're meeting with like platforms, so often someone will be banned for referencing like an intra-community thing, right? Like a joke, like if I'm a Black person joking with another Black person, AI might not understand the cultural context of that and would be like, oh, you're banned. And so I think that we're not in a place where AI can be solely the moderator of platforms and have it be something that actually is effective. But I do think like it's shifting very rapidly. But I think ultimately what's important is that the humans who are tasked with moderation today are being supported, have access to what they need, whether it's professional tools, mental health care, insurance, not being like a gig worker who is being exploited but has like benefits. I think like that's really where I think that we should be focusing our intention, I would say right now.
That's excellent. I not even considered that part of it, but you're right that the financial supports of those folks, because probably a lot of them are in the gig economy. So we have another question in chat. Missed the first half of this, so may have been covered, but have you seen the Maria Ressa talk on the Richmond Forum? She's a Filipino journalist who dug into a handful of social media algorithms that lead to unrest in various countries, including her own. That talk has aired on our local PBS station, apparently. I saw you writing down. I also made a note. I was like, oh, something I need to go look at. So that's one of the way these things work, right? It's one of the great things about community is somebody will say, hey, have you heard this? Or hey, does that happen to you pretty frequently?
Oh my God, absolutely. I can't, that's one of the fun things about making this show is that you don't have to be an expert. And so you can be like, oh, I don't know this, or like, oh, tell me about this. Like I learn so much from the community of people who listen, from like the people that I'm interviewing. So yeah, people will drop gems that I love, like things to check out. I just wrote down that piece. I'll definitely check it out. But yeah, it's one of the best things about this job is like people recommending things for me to check out that deepen my understanding of an issue.
And the person who put that in chat, could you put the name of that up again for folks that's been requested in chat that you put the name of that, or if you remember the name of that talk. So I know we're coming to time and we've kept you a long time. I'm gonna let people have just a couple minutes to put in if they have any last minute questions, but I have one more if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so her name is Maria Ressa, R-E-S-S-A, discussing harmful social media algorithms. And that is a purely selfish question. So I'm just going to ask you, what can people who are less marginalized on the internet do to support people who are more marginalized on the internet? What can I think I'm in a position of privilege. I'm educated, I'm white, right? Like I have a lot of those privileges. How can I support people whose work needs to be surfaced and raised up?
Oh, love this question. Thank you for submitting it. I would say one is like amplifying and listening to and amplifying the voices of people who are like more marginalized. Like I have a lot of privilege myself, and so I always try to like remember that I bring that to these conversations. And so then using that privilege that I have to spotlight and amplify folks who have less privilege than I do, and like let them be the experts of their own experience, let them tell the stories of how they are impacted, don't speak over them, really provide a platform is one. And then two, the other is sort of like maybe a little loftier. See these issues as real. I think that marginalized people on the internet, so often it feels like people are just being like, oh, it's not a real thing. Like for the longest time, I don't think people saw internet harms as having any kind of relationship to the real world. I would say be open to the idea that that is not the case, right? Like the same way that I feel like the Me Too movement really changed the conversation around gender and sexual dynamics and sexual violence, or Black Lives Matter really changed the conversation around things like racial justice and policing. I think that we need to have that galvanizing moment that helps people understand and see these issues as real, and see these issues as like the way that they really do impact all of us. And so individually, we can try to like make that moment happen. If somebody is talking about an experience of harm that they had that happened online, don't minimize it. Let them like be willing to hear that these issues are real, even if they're not issues that you yourself personally might have experience with.
Thank you. It's always nice to have a plan of action to
Definitely
go forward. And you mentioned something about in an article about somebody stalking a Black woman on the internet, which I personally found that headline horrifying. But if I'm looking for podcasts to listen to of folks of color, I'm assuming your podcast is a good place to start to help find that community, a doorway to help find that community. So how often do you post?
So we are currently kind of on a little bit of a hiatus, but we're coming back. I think it's May 18th. I'm looking at my calendar. I should know this. Yes, May 18th. And so we drop episodes 2 times a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. Yeah, like my podcast is a great place to start. You should definitely listen. But also like there are so many interesting people making content about technology and internet experiences. So yeah, I think like there's a really good podcast about trans identity on iHeart called, Trans Slash? There's a new network within iHeart called, God, I'm like blanking all the stuff I should be like remembering to promote. Outspoken, which is all about the queer experience online. Yeah, there's so many voices out there who are making cool content about marginalized experiences and how that shows up online. So check out my show, but keep checking out all of them. There's so many good voices out there.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind people that we'll be able to listen to your new season soon, and we can go back and get your older seasons now.
Oh, that's right.
And download this and binge listen, which is what I like to do on long car trips, right? Is binge listen so that I get a big feel of things.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Bridget. This has been amazing. You are just an amazing speaker, and you're also giving us real world view, which I think is so important, because you're right. A lot of people in the tech space speak in a way that implies that there's no possible way that us regular folk could understand what they're saying. And you've both humanized and brought these to be very much in touch with us as listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for letting me hang out with you all. Please keep in touch. Like, I'm not just saying that. My email is there. Like, if you want to talk podcasting or anything, like, I love the VCU community. I'm so excited that I got to even like hang out with you all for a little bit. It's been a great experience for me. So please keep in touch. I mean it.
Well, you are welcome to come visit us at the workshop anytime you're in town. Please let us know. And just once again, thank you so much to everybody who came. Thank you so much to Bridget. This was just like everything I needed to hear today. So thank you so much. And this will be available on YouTube afterwards. We will have a transcript that goes with it. That is required for VCU Libraries content. And just thank you so much to everyone who showed up and came out. So
Thank you.
Thank you. This was so fun.